Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 490. Omniscient Author's Viewpoint. Part 4. Every Dakibi dreamed of becoming the great Dakibi. That was the peak of one's tale that a Starstream-esque Dakibi could reach. Yet, those that did reach the top continued to dream. Bai Hyung stared at the final wall, utterly filling up the view out from the front of the Arkansas. Even though so many stories existed, most of the wall was still empty. Is there a reason to go this far? Bai Hyung's anger caused the great Dakibi's communication line to go silent. He then continued to observe the Kim Dokja Company's companions from the skies of the final scenario, and at the figure of Kim Dokja as the outer god. Starting from the subway that day, all the way up to the final scenario, while Kim Dokja became the demon king of salvation, then became the Watcher of Light and Darkness, Bai Hyung also became a higher-class Dakibi, before eventually ending up as a great Dakibi himself. The biggest mistake a storyteller can make is excessively interfering in a scenario. Dakibi's mission was to attract as much attention of the constellations and create stories that would be recorded on the final wall. That was why Dakibis should never be dragged around by the scenarios themselves. They must never be seduced by the fables blooming from within the scenarios, and especially should not empathize with the incarnation's pain. But Bai Hyung made that very blunder. While looking at their fable, several of the feelings he had forgotten in the past woke back up again, that flutter of one's heart when one scenario ended and the next one came around, that sense of fulfillment after seeing the constellations rejoice or wallow from the scenario he had cooked up. Bai Hyung learned about scenario from Kim Dokja. They are not carrying out the scenario incorrectly. From the beginning, scenario flows in a reversible, malleable way. Meaning, it flows in the direction that many stars wish to see. Other constellations of Starstream are. Looks like you care greatly about this fable since you helped to foster it, but listen well. There is something called the flow of the bigger story. Bai Hyung was about to raise his voice only to hold himself back. He had to, as every other great Dakibi was now focusing on him. Although vexing, he had no choice as the youngest in this group. Great Dakibi Garong finally broke the silence it had been maintaining until now. A young great Dakibi such as yourself probably finds such conclusions quite fresh. However, I've witnessed fables like that many times before. Do you honestly think that, in its immense history, there had been no one else who resented Starstream and tried to destroy it? The great Dakibi Garong, one of the oldest Dakibis in existence, and also the closest aide to the Dakibi king, too. There have been countless destructions before. Bai Hyung simply couldn't unpack the remorse faintly discernible from that tone of voice. Not all destruction is the same, replied Bai Hyung. A few great Dakibis glared at him as a warning. However, he tried his best not to shrink back and held Garang's gaze. The latter stared at the former with mysterious, profound eyes, and only after a lengthy amount of time opened its mouth. Indeed, they dream of is slightly different from other fables. Perhaps that statement got on its nerves. The great Dakibi Ansi stopped observing and tried to intervene. Garong raised its hand first and stopped its colleague while continuing on with its words. But that difference is the thread itself. Not every fable will become a foundation for the next one. What do you mean by that? There are certain fables that will completely break the scenario. Gaia. The screams from the nameless ones. Once upon a time, they too were beings that participated in different scenarios. They cried out in despair and attacked the constellations. And in their center was the outer god king Kim Dokja leading these godly beings from the other worlds. The enemy of the story. To Bai Hyung's knowledge, no other calamity was given that title. He hadn't even heard of the plan to give that title in the first place. Garong continued on while watching Kim Dokja's resistance. At the beginning of every scenario, the protagonists will always experience the deviation from the normal world. They will fight against the enemies appearing before them, experience dilemmas, and sacrifice something in order to emerge victorious before returning to their original world to receive their deserved rewards. Bai Hyung knew of that theory. The first thing the lower-ranked Dakibis would hear about was that ancient rule of the scenario. Although outdated, that is still the focal point of the scenario. This cycle has to be protected so that the next scenario can be created, and the next world line can open up. Conflicts will be mended, wounds will be healed, the world must remain in one piece as if nothing had happened to it. The distant foot of a mountain range collapsed, before exploding spectacularly. The number of constellations gathering was constantly increasing. Baihyang knew the truth. This very final scenario had been planned from the get-go. The end of the world will come, and then it'll be defeated. That imaginary enemy called the Outer God King only existed for that sole purpose. Stars that once used to be at odds with each other would unite against the advent of a powerful enemy and fight together. Some may die and some may survive, but they would still get to resolve all the old conflicts. The world would regain its peace. The gossipers would sing about this history and pass it down through the generations. And nothing will change. Star Stream will continue on. And that was the truth of the scenario that the Dakibis pursued. The scenario must cycle back and repeat itself. The absolute majority of constellations are excited by the final scenario. To ensure that no one realized what the star stream actually was, and why the scenario had to be repeated, brand new stories had to be supplied to the constellations. However, there were a few that resisted against this. Great Fable, Demon World Spring, is continuing with its storytelling. Great Fable, Torch That Swallowed the Myth, is rejecting the predetermined development. Those that resisted against the scenarios predetermined for them, and they wished to bring down the existence of the star stream itself. Incarnation Han Suyang's never-ending story. The never-ending story. The contradicting that didn't acknowledge the end as an end, was glowing brightly. Over yonder. That was the conclusion an author, not a storyteller of the universe, had decided on. They were existences that rejected the star stream-s cycle and chose to fight on forever. Huaya. As the explosion roared on, the great Dakibi Garong finally made its declaration. Let us close the lid on this world line here. The great Dakibis keeping silent, and those that were observing the responses of their peers until then, all nodded their heads in unison. Even before Baihyang could say something, Baram next to him spoke up first. Baihyang, I'm sorry, but things have come down to this. It seems that you'll have to overlook it this time. The moment Baihyang saw Baram's expression, he realized the truth. Every single great Dakibi gathered here was the universe's best storytellers. They were the rulers that lorded over the scenarios and manipulated the stars while controlling this world line. Even then, for the first time ever, they had grown fearful of the story they had created. We will use up the remaining probability in order to forcibly execute the main scenario. Forcibly executing the scenario was the last trump card up their sleeve that the Dakibis could resort to. It was kind of a deus ex machina that could forcefully restrict the flow of star stream at the cost of the truly nonsensical amount of probability. Especially so when trying to use it during the final scenario, the amount required simply defied one's imaginations. Suchuchuchuchu. When the Bureau's probability began moving, the skies over the whole of Starstream was blanketed by blinding explosion of sparks. There didn't seem to be any spot left for darkness to hide within this world line. They must end as evil. As if to agree with the will of the great Dakibis, Great Fables began supporting them. Great Fable, Temple of the Destroyed Myth, is complying with the Bureau's will. Great Fable, Advent of the New Dawn, is agreeing with the flow. Great Fable, Eternal Olympus, respects the Bureau's will. Baihyang watched the final pages being written by the great Dakibis from a step away. Other great Dakibis are strongly urging you to make your decision. He was yet to agree with this conclusion. Baihyang. Even though Baram called out to him, he didn't reply. Starstream is resisting against the great Dakibis' interference. The sparks in the skies soon reached the great Dakibis. An incredible storm of aftermaths was rushing in. Even if they were great Dakibis, trying to intervene in a scenario still required this much price to pay. I, Great Dakibi Garong, declare my intention to officially participate in the scenario. Garam's declaration prompted other great Dakibis to make theirs as well. I, Great Dakibi Naksu, declare my intention to, I, Great Dakibi Haram, declare. Over 10 great Dakibis were hardening their resolve. The meaning of officially participating in the scenario meant they were giving up on the positions of neutral bystanders. A short while later, a message could be heard in the empty air. Starstream's probability is experiencing a massive and sudden change. Starstream permits the meta-like intervention. From here onwards, storytellers will no longer be the scenario's bystanders. Many constellations are greatly stunned by the Great Dakibi's decision. A portion of constellations are denouncing the Great Dakibi's act of brutality. Baihyang stared at those Great Dakibis. He stared at their desire to end this world, even going as far as to ignore the constellations and their messages of opposition. It could be that they had been writing the scenario for far too long. There was another gaze from afar staring at these Great Dakibis. Baihyang met this gaze. It was from Kim Dokja, who had become an outer god and then, the enemy of the story. After he became an existence outside of the scenario, not even Baihyang could understand him now. Even then, why? Baihyang thought that, in that very moment, Kim Dokja seemed to be smiling. It could very well be that these Great Dakibis still didn't understand anything about that guy. Still failing to understand what kind of a person Kim Dokja was. Failing to realize what it meant to officially participate in the scenario, and to become its characters. Baihyang silently received that gaze, and took a step forward. Yura is calling out to you. And so, it was now Baihyang's turn to choose his. Asterisk. The intervention from the Great Dakibis caused the scenario's balance to tilt the other way. The target you wish to protect is the enemy of the story. Your actions are restricted by the Bureau's probability. Not just Han Suyang, but the rest of the companions were being sucked into the storm of the probabilities aftermaths as well. Pale blue sparks tightly wrapped around their bodies like binding ropes. Suyang SSI, this. Those sons of bitches. They are planning to end the scenario in this way. Great Fable, Season of Light and Darkness, is quietly seething in anger. Great Fable, Liberator of the Forgotten Ones, has begun its storytelling. The Kim Dokja Company's Great Fables did absolutely everything in order to resist the Bureau. However, it wasn't enough. Their enemy this time was the strongest Great Fable in this world. Now, attack its head. Constellations managed to pry open the gap among the nameless ones and advanced forward, before finally firing their weapons at Kim Dokja. Kim Dokja. Han Suyang cried out, but her voice couldn't reach him. You can't protect the target. Target you wish to protect is an existence you don't know. Screw you, don't give me that crap. She recalled what the Great Dakibi said as if it was some kind of a curse. A human couldn't understand another even after devoting one's lifetime. However, they weren't just one person. Han Suyang looked around her. Yi Hyansong, Zhang, Huiwen, Yi Jihai, and then, Xing Yusung and Yi Gilyong. Finally, her comrades riding on the battleship were looking back at her. Perhaps, there was none among them who weren't Kim Dokja. Everyone here, they held at least one handful of share in Kim Dokja's life. However, there was one person missing from this picture. Where did that guy disappear to? Han Suyang bit her lip. Unfortunately, she couldn't wait any longer. Ah! Zhang Huiwen screamed as if her body was being torn apart while moving forward. The storm of aftermath was shattering her muscles and blowing up her blood vessels. Still, she forged ahead even as her tattered, bloodied body tottered unsteadily. She took one step at a time towards Kim Dokja while gripping the judge's sword tightly. It wasn't to cut him down, though. Clong! Zhang Huiwen deflected a blade of a constellation flying in only to vomit out a mouthful of blood. Yi Hyansong was right behind her. Kudu-do-do-do. The outer godified Kim Dokja was fighting against the constellations from within the storm of aftermath. And his comrades were protecting him even as they were left in tatters by the exploding sparks. There are this many people here, yet we can't protect Kim Dokja? Fable, Predictive Plagiarism, has begun its storytelling. Fable, savior of the star, is searching for the demon king of salvation. Fable, insect king, is searching for the demon king of salvation. Fable, judge of the apocalypse, is searching for the demon king of salvation. Every fable they owned was searching for Kim Dokja. They were crying out towards the man they used to know. Fable, predictive plagiarism, is continuing with its storytelling. If they couldn't fight together because they couldn't understand him, and if that's why they couldn't protect him, then many constellations are sighing in lamentation at the Kim Dokja Company's tragedy. A portion of constellations are lodging a protest at the Bureau's treachery, and blood trickled down Han Soo-young's lips. Dizziness assaulted her overheating head and her consciousness was wavering. It was also right then that someone grasped her shoulder. She thought that curly blonde locks were dancing past her eyes, only for something to start protecting her and the companions. It felt like a transparent wall was enveloping them. Wall of impossible communication is protecting Kim Dokja Company. Jang Hyang materialized her wall, and while supporting Han Soo-young, began walking towards Kim Dokja. Is there anyone here who likes the demon king of salvation more than me? Su Chuchuchut. Dokja SSI, I'll stop telling you about that story of the lost things. It feels like you're fed up. Hyung, I'm right here. I have something I want to tell you. Don't worry. I won't go anywhere without you, a juicy. Sentences were scattering away. Fables that Kim Dokja Company had compiled so far were now intertwining into one theme. A fragment of the final wall has been revealed to the world. Great Dakibis are greatly astonished. Wall of impossible communication is placing its fragment into its place. While being supported by Jang Hyang, Han Soo-young reached out to the outer god king, Kim Dokja. She felt the sensation of touching a wall. A cold and uncaring wall. Nebula, Kim Dokja Company's first theme has been publicly unveiled. This wall existed in order to let others know that someone was beyond it. To let them know there was a person requiring a wall in this world. To let them know one could converse with another without hurting each other. Han Soo-young wrote her very first words on that impossible wall. You idiot. She couldn't believe that she wrote something that stupid. However, she didn't have any energy left to write a follow-up. It was then that the wall began shaking. Accompanied by a light knocking noise, a new sentence she didn't write appeared above the wall. Han Soo-young. Chapter 491. Omniscient Author's Viewpoint. Part 5. That was Kim Dokja. That sentence, it definitely came from him. She didn't need to hear his voice to know that. Han Soo-young wrote the next sentence. What's this, you were alright? Being an author didn't mean you were in control of every word you write. And also, she was the type of person who could only write stuff like that. However, Kim Dokja should be able to read that fine. Because he was the greatest reader she knew. Knock. Along with a slight knocking noise, she heard his laughter. Sounds of weapons clashing coming from everywhere hurt her ears. Her companions were still bitterly fighting. No time to leisurely waste time, in other words. You knew this would happen from the get-go, didn't you? She couldn't clearly see the sentence written on the wall. As if the communication earlier was just a pure fluke of really low odds. Hey, you! Write legibly, will ya? Even though Jang Hyang was helping out here, Kim Dokja's message still couldn't be seen. Wall of impossible communication is unleashing its power. Su Chuchuchut. Far too many sentences were aimlessly floating above the wall. Every single one of them happened to be what she and the rest of the companions said to Kim Dokja. Some of them were clear to see, while some were indistinct. Soo-young. I know. While listening to Jang Hyang's voice, Han Soo-young reached out to the wall one more time. She tried really hard to find Kim Dokja's message by combining the floating sentences. Fable, predictive plagiarism, has begun its storytelling. Target is an existence you can't understand. What connected each letter was context. Letters cast out in the sea without context were akin to a book that had been created to be unreadable. I'm going home now. You'll lend me a spare battery when we go camping? All she could do now was to connect those contextless sentences somehow. Inject context into these nonsensical sentences to give them meaning. Shuffle those that weren't plot development so that they looked like it. However, it was not enough. No matter how she connected them, there would always be some part without meaning. Kim Dokja. Say something. What is the plan? Just what do you want us to do here? No reply came back to her. The roaring outer god king was still battling the constellations. The heavily bleeding companions were collapsing within the storm of aftermaths. Han Suyang gritted her teeth. It was fine if Kim Dokja didn't want to say it. The important part was reading his intentions. His intentions of making such a move without letting his companions know of his plans. It was to figure out his thought process on choosing to become the outer god king. It was then words began gathering one by one. If the ways of survival was behind a paywall, just how much have I used it so far? If I had 20 million Korean wons in my bank account, what would I feel? If there are 2 rooms, then how does the remaining one get filled up, usually? If I had met you back in the normal world, I would never ever have become your friend. Those words seemed randomly thrown out like a memo. She still collected those words and sentences, anyway. An excellent writer had to be an excellent reader first. And Han Suyang knew a way to read such things. How does one go about making money? One had to accept that sometimes, you'll run into a sentence you can't comprehend yet and flip the page over. Just so that, one day, you'd able to read that sentence when you did return to the very same page later. Target is an existence you can't understand. There was no choice but to desperately flip the pages over and over again, and then some more, to gather as many clues on those impossible sentences. Doesn't my life have money-making probability or something? Suchachuchu. She saw Zhang Huiwen kneeling down in the distance. Yi Seolhua ran over and supported her, while Yu Sangha and Yi Hyen Song blocked the weapons flying in her direction. Bureau's probability is restricting your interference in the scenario. Kim Dokja was right. Probability was to blame for everything. The reason why he was poor, why they ended up in this state. Bureau's probability is confining your body. Suchachachat. Probability in this world was basically power. The scenario would flow towards those possessing more plausible probability. Your nebula has violated far too much probability. Han Suyang knew that. This storm of aftermath was the reward for overcoming many dangerous situations through sheer luck. They had so many companions, yet none were lost on their way to the final scenario. On the other hand, other incarnations had to sacrifice so much more trying to get this far. Why only they? This is unfair. Do you know how hard we had to struggle to get this far? Kim Dokja Company had violated far too much probability. No one was sacrificed when one was needed. Or, more correctly, only one person got continuously sacrificed. Kim Dokja. He died multiple times and got resurrected again. He even revived someone that should have died. While using the revival attribute, or even visiting the underworld, and going so far as to alter the future. And that's why Kim Dokja had to become the enemy of the story. Because all the great fables Kim Dokja Company had compiled didn't have enough probability. Han Suyang grasped at the sentences as if she was scratching the wall. It was then a new sentence suddenly floated up. For the time being, you take over the nebula safe. This was a conversation she had with Kim Dokja not too long ago. What's this? I might end up spending it all, you know? She received the authority to manage the safe via the system. She wondered what possessed Mr. Miser Kim Dokja to do this. Back then, she figured that he was simply too lazy to manage the finances and dumped the job on her shoulders instead. Would you like to confirm the current balance? However, would that Kim Dokja really hand over the safe to someone else with that reasoning? As if she had been entranced, Han Suyang opened the safe. Wow, you saved up a lot, haven't you? What a miserly guy you are. What are you planning to do by saving up this much, though? They have their uses. There was a humongous amount of coins saved up in the safe. More than enough treasure to tempt any star was hidden inside there. And this was the most basic currency of sponsorship, and the power source to move the scenario. One of the most powerful fables in this world is coins. However, there weren't all that many things one could do with coins now, whether that was reinforcing the incarnation bodies or purchasing stuff from the Dakibi bundle. That's why she was quite curious. What was the point of so obsessively hoarding all these coins? Will you spend these coins for the growth of the great fable? And then, Han Suyang finally realized that very reason. I will. Nebula's cash of 143,245,199 coins will be paid to the probability. Kugugugugu. The moment her declaration came to an end, fables rushed in like wild predators lusting after fresh meat. Entrancing golden light blanketed the companions. Great fable, Demon World Spring, is greedily gorging on the coins fable. Great fable torch that swallowed the mist figure is ballooning up. Great fable season of light and darkness's contrast is getting even clearer. The great fables would grow to possess even more power by devouring the available funds. The fable's details would be realized more faithfully, viscerally, and also more colorfully. Kugugugugu. When the strengths of the great fables began resisting the Bureau's probability, both the great Dakibis and constellations began panicking. Zhang Huiwan's sword grew lighter and lighter, while Ihyensong's shield was getting sturdier and sturdier. Monstrous beasts and insect kings Shin Yusung and Yi Gilyong summoned began tearing into the constellations in the back. Fire! Yi Jihai's battleship began firing its cannons and the incarnations in the front lines dissipated without a trace. Unfortunately, their higher odds of victory lasted only for a brief while. Bureau's probability has increased its level of restriction. The jet-black rifts began spreading in the heavens from the excessive usage of the probability. The entire stage for the scenario was shaking unsteadily. Fables began leaking out from the mouths of several great Dakibis. They had bet their lives on this must-win battle. In order to create the conclusion they wanted to see, these Dakibis personally jumped into the scenario and willingly became the part of the story. Suchachachat. Black Flame Dragon. Powerful, black flame wrapped around Han Suyang. While filtering away attacks coming in at her, more black flames were fired out. Right next to her, Jan Haiyang was relying on the Murim's skills to guard her back. Why did Kim Dokja entrust her with this role? There was someone better suited for this job, the protagonist of a certain story. However, Kim Dokja still entrusted this job to her. Susu. Jang Haiyang's wall was scattering away again. It was going away after exhausting all its powers. The Bureau's restrictions made it harder to even breathe. Kim Dokja, momentarily within reach, grew distant again. The flow of the story was once more going over to the great Dakibis. Han Suyang cried out. Yura's never-ending story. A story where none would be lost. A story where everyone would live together in a huge house at the end of all the scenarios. The companions were fighting for that simple dream. However, their probability wasn't enough and that dream couldn't become reality. Constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is now looking at his own incarnation. It was right then, a light bulb flashed brightly in her head. Not enough probability? The reason why Kim Dokja entrusted this role to Han Suyang and not Ju Young. Hayok. Constellation, Maritime War God, is looking at incarnation Han Suyang. Drip, drip. Blood dripped down from her wounded shoulder. Han Suyang haphazardly wrapped some bandages around the injury and looked up at the sky. There they were, distant stars of Starstream, visible among the storm of sparks raining down. Far more constellations than ever before were watching the last moments of this world. Many constellations are dissatisfied with this scenario's development. Quite a number of constellations are criticizing the tyranny of the Bureau and the myth-grade constellations. Han Suyong suddenly smiled insidiously. That's right. You were all constellations. Kim Dokja should have known this. Because he too was a constellation. He was a reader who knew better than anyone on how to make a scenario more entertaining and even tenser than before. And that's why Kim Dokja hadn't said anything to his companions. Han Suyong clenched her hand tightly. Since she had spent all the coins, she was now literally empty-handed. However, Kim Dokja hadn't just left her with coins only. When the first scenario started, you all said this to us. That we had been living for free. So, we should start paying the price for that. What Kim Dokja had left behind was Constellation, Bald General of Justice, is focusing on Incarnation Han Suyong's words. Constellation, One-Eyed Maitreya, is focusing on Incarnation Han Suyong's words. The entirety of their lives lived so far. What you said back then, I'm returning it in full back to you. Along with Han Suyong's signal, Bu shut the channel off as if she was waiting for that. And then, the Constellation's channel went dark. Channel BY 9158's all broadcast screens have been blocked. Constellation, Heavenly Wind God, is panicking at the sudden blackout. Constellation, Josian's #1 sorcerer, wishes to see what happens next. After the world had fallen into darkness, the panicky voices of constellations from other scenario locations watching the channel could be heard resounding out. Every subscriber had to go through BU's channel to watch the Kim Dokja Company's story. Even though subscribing to other channels had no choice but to see this world through BU's, at least at this moment. From now on, our story will be a paid service. Chapter 492. Omniscient Author's Viewpoint. Part 6. The announcement of the paywall brought about a deep silence in the channel. Only Han Suyong's heavy breathing could be heard within the pitch-black darkness of the stage. If you wish to continue watching this tragedy, what Kim Dokja Company lacked right now was probability. Probability. The thing that made the story flow naturally and in a plausible manner. The set of rules that could only be changed by the gazes of countless constellations and the coins they sponsored. It's time you guys pay, too. Only then did she figure out Kim Dokja's plan in its entirety. And because she did, she could say this out aloud now. Selling off the tragedy of his life lived solely for the purpose of saving his companions, just like how his mother did once upon a time. Kim Dokja wanted to change the scenario by selling the tragedy Kim Dokja Company had created. The absolute majority of constellations are greatly shocked. Han Suyong's declaration caused the constellations to grow hesitant. She recalled the memories from back when her novel went behind the paywall for the first time ever. Author name, it'll start from tomorrow. She felt the exact same emotion back then as today. The feeling of not knowing what would happen in the future. How many people would end up reading my writing? How long would I be able to live on by selling off this story? You stinking Kim Dokja. So, you slapped me with this kind of role, is that it? What she needed to do right now wasn't selling some novels. Great Fable, Demon World Spring, wishes to tell the next part of the story. Great Fable, Torch the Swallowed the Myth, wishes to tell the next part of the story. Great Fable, Season of Light and Darkness, wishes to tell the next part of the story. Great Fable, Liberator of the Forgotten Ones, wishes to tell the next part of the story. The words written by Kim Dokja Company's blood and tears. What she needed to sell was their life story. Fables that she couldn't carelessly change or tell in a jokey manner. Even then, she offered up these fables for sale to the constellations. Bu and her concerned eyes were looking at her from the sky. Han Suyong smiled as if to say, "Don't worry. There's no one? That's too bad. Things are about to get really interesting from now on." Only she could do this job. Only Han Suyong, designated as the baddie among Kim Dokja Company, could sell this story. As if to sympathize with her, the movements of the outer god king was getting duller. maybe, he was wallowing in sorrow. How laughable. Who do you think will be interested in your measly little story? The one to shatter this silence was the myth-grade constellation, Poseidon. The figures of other myth-grade constellations could be seen in the distance as well. They were all mocking Han Suyang. Do you really believe that your fable is worth that much? It was the same with the great Dakibis. They all seemed to be thinking that Han Suyang's choice was an error in judgment, one made while under the weight of the encroaching end. Su-cha-cha-chat. Once the constellations left, the channel's size shrunk down. Some channels even tried to but in using this opportunity. Channels that belonged to Dakibi's hostile towards Kim Dokja Company. Finish them. Constellations manning their positions at the back made their moves. They were mostly myth-grade, or those top-ranked fable-grade constellations that almost equaled them in power. Constellation, one responsible for the universe's cycle, is surveying the scenario's battlefield. Constellation, mirror that emits smoke, is incarnating into the scenario's battlefield. Constellation, master of thunder and war, is incarnating into the scenario's battlefield. Indian myths Brahma. Aztec myths Tezcatlipoca. Even Slavic myths Purin. The constellations from the different large-scale nebulas that never showed themselves in the lower scenarios until now, their movement alone was fable in itself. And when the great fables began their actions, the flow pressuring the battlefield intensified even more. Gaia, Puji-Uhgak. The nameless ones desperately blocking the constellations approaching Kim Dokja were blown up indiscriminately. Myth-grade constellations possessed the largest shares of the great fable of each nebula. Once they began moving their probability, the balance of the engagement tilted in their favor in an instant. Han Suyang watched the incoming wave of the stars and muttered out. Even in places you didn't bother to look, we managed to eke out a living. The screens might be blacked out, but the sound still continued to be transmitted. And probably, her voice was being heard by every constellation in the channel. Han Suyang also knew. Not every constellation liked them. Kim Dokja Company had a lot of enemies. Some cheered their fable on, but some others either were jealous of them or in some cases, even hated them. At times, malice with no basis could be found, too. However, there was one common denominator among that gamut of emotions. And that was the fact that they had been watching a certain fable for a very long time. A story that you spent a very long time with will eventually become a part of you. Just like Kim Dokja and the ways of survival. However, the moment you close your eyes, this story you've been watching will end right here. Her words didn't target any particular listener, meaning, it was a declaration aimed at everyone. Eventually, constellations annihilated the front ranks of the outer gods and rushed in. The Kim Dokja Company's companions stepped up to block them. Kwaya. A baptism of status in the form of Poseidon's wave, with Zeus's lightning added on top, crashed in. Outer gods burning away like meat being grilled by electricity died in their droves. Even those from Kim Dokja Company wouldn't be able to receive that wave with their current body conditions. Even then, Han Suyang believed in her comrades. Even if I die, I will never stop moving. Han Suyang fired, black flame, with every ounce of her energy. However, its power was less than a quarter after being suppressed by the probability. And just as Poseidon's wave reached the front of their nose and began pouncing on them. For a very brief moment there, it felt as if the world came to a standstill. Also, it felt like a fundamental something that created this world seemed to have changed, as if a thin brush was painting over it. And then in the following moment, the frozen world began moving forward again. A fatal error has occurred in the final scenario. Poseidon's wave and Zeus's lightning pounced on her and Kim Dokja Company. Quadadududu. More correctly, pounced on the protective barrier in front of them. It was the sturdy, vast wall of forged steel. Which was Hyunsung's fable. His fable that blanketed the entire planet back in Oz was now protecting his companions. But, he should still be under the restrictions by the Bureau. So how could he? Suyang SSI. A terrifying amount of sparks was streaming all over Lee Hyun-sung's body. But it wasn't only him. Everyone from Kim Dokja Company, wasting away under the bureau's restrictions, were now enveloped in the dancing blue-hued sparks. Their once imprisoned muscles regained their freedom, and the arrested magical energy was being freed as well. The error in the channel's donation payout has been normalized. The message entered their ears in the next moment. Delayed donation amounts will now be paid out. BU could be seen crying softly in the air next. At the same time, an incredible amount of indirect messages smacked Han Soo-young in her ear. Constellation, demon-like judge of fire, happily donates half of the coins she owns. Just how much was the half of coins amassed by a constellation at the cusp of reaching the myth grade? Han Soo-young couldn't even estimate the amount. Constellation, abyssal black flame dragon, is paying an incredible amount of coins while grumbling unhappily. Constellation, most ancient liberator, is, so many stars began glowing brightly. The nebula safe started filling up rapidly with wealth. Nebula safe total balance, 83,112,540 C. Nebula safe total balance, 162,423,800 C. Nebula safe total balance, 1,041,512,080 C. The total coins surpassed 100 million in no time, before breaking past a billion mark. That pretty much determined what Han Soo-young should do next. Which was to spend every single cent of that donated amount into the probability. Suchachachuchit. Everyone, hold on. Constellation, mass production type maker, is grinning brightly. Constellation, mass production type maker, has donated the number of coins that exceeds the upper donation limit. The geezer wearing the pineapple-themed t-shirt. Back when Han Soo-young went to shoot a commercial for the Ferragini, she had a chance to chat to him for a brief spell. You really think such adverts will sell your car? When Han Soo-young asked, the mass production type maker replied in a somewhat obtuse manner. I'm not advertising to sell, but advertising the product about to be sold. And now, she thought she could understand that answer just a bit. Constellation, Josian's #1 sorcerer, is donating 5,000 coins. Constellation, Miranging Marquis Zhuangmo, is donating 5,100 coins. Constellation, father of the rich knight, is donating everything in his secret stash. Constellation, mother of the darkest spring, is donating half of the underworld's balance. Constellation, supreme god of light, is donating 2,100,000 coins. Constellation, lily blooming on Aquarius, is donating 1,500,000 coins. Constellations of familiar modifiers. Constellation, lame trickster, is donating 15,000 coins. Constellation, monarch of small fries, is donating 450,000 coins. Constellation, adventurer that stands up an egg, is donating 18,000 coins. Constellation, master of the Nichiryu, is donating 4,000 coins. All the stars in the Big Dipper are donating 300,000 coins. A small constellation from a small planet is donating 300 coins. Constellations that were familiar, but not counted on. A great number of constellations staying anonymous have added their strength to the nebula Kim Dokja Company's probability. And finally, even the constellations they didn't know. Every constellation that came along for the ride with Kim Dokja Company's fable was now sponsoring their story. Light returned to the once darkened channel, and the broadcast began once more. Channel BY 9158's broadcast will begin again. The story was starting again. All these coins contained the wills of the constellations. Their desire to see the end of this fable. Han Soo-young too understood this desire. However, there were some who failed to do so. What are you all doing? Could it be that you're sympathizing with those incarnations? With the enemies of the story? Everyone, you must wake up. Have you all forgotten who you are? Oh, dear constellations, don't let your eyes be stolen away by a demeaning story like that. The great Dakibi roared out. That prompted someone to answer back. Constellation, demon-like judge of fire, says she's more clear-headed than ever before. Suchuchuchu. An incredible storm of probability was pushed back, and Poseidon's wave sunk back to the ground. Han Suyang slowly closed her eyes. A breeze was blowing in. Will of Star Stream accepts the new flow of probability. Something was changing. Star Stream is considering an alteration to the scenario's rules. All probability from the Bureau ruthlessly suppressing her and her companions were dissipating away. The scenario's balance that had been heavily tilted out of equilibrium was regaining itself. You still can't understand enemy of the story. Kim Dokja remained difficult. However, enemy of the story wishes to be understood by you. However, it wasn't as if nothing had changed. Scenario's rules are changing. From here on, all constellations can choose a camp to side with during the final scenario. Han Suyang slowly looked around her. The surrounding view began changing as if a layer of the world had been peeled back. Go. Fight on. This is our battlefield. A man astride a horse brushed past Han Suyang's side. Without a doubt, he used to be an outer god only until a second ago. An existence that used to be a nameless one. The strange monsters covered in tentacles and sticky fluids, and caused one to feel instinctive fear simply by looking at them. We can win this. Do not give up until the end. Their figures were changing. Some changed into people, some into dwarves. They were from all sorts of different species, but regardless of what, they were no longer the existences of unknown. Biomgak. Move. This is the final scenario we've been dreaming of. Mark. All those nameless ones now had names in this place. You have sided with the enemy of the story. These beings rushed towards the constellations as dusk fell on the battlefield. They formed ranks and advanced towards the constellations. I shall accompany you. Among them was a man who resembled Yi Hyun-sung, and also a child resembling Shin Yu-sung. Even some that resembled Zhang Huiwen, Yi Gilyong, and Yi Ji-hai. Not bad. So, then. This world line has reached this far? For a brief moment there, Han Suyang saw a girl who seemed to resemble her, too. And all of them were fighting as the ally of the enemy of the story. Her dazed eyes chased after their backs. Every abandoned world line was converging here. The world that she couldn't express with mere words. The world that the predictive plagiarism couldn't read because it could only be imagined by a reader. This was the world Kim Dokja had been dreaming of. Han Suyang slowly turned around towards the spot where the outer god king was only until a moment ago. And a certain man stood on that very spot where a deep abyss cast by the massive creature's size used to exist. Han Suyang, what should an extra do in order to garner attention? The white coat revealed itself fleetingly underneath the tattered and torn black coat. You're an extra because no one pays you attention. Han Suyang staggered towards that spot. Well, there isn't any clear solution. Normally, you grab some attention by sacrificing yourself, or... She walked and walked some more, and eventually reached the front of that man. Or, you give them stories of their own. The man quietly stood there and waited for her. Han Suyang stood up straight in front of Kim Dokja. Quite unlike her usual self, she thought she might start crying now. Her vision blurred and couldn't see his face properly. You did well. And Kim Dokja was standing there,